welcome everyone to Using AI at Scale to Automate Global Content Creation. Thank you for signing up to this event. And I'm thrilled to have Vincent Henderson with me, VP of Strategy at Lionbridge for Lionbridge's Global Content Business. Before I get you to introduce yourself, just a bit about myself. Some of you might already know me or have been to one of my webinars. My name is Melanie Müller. I'm the CEO of Gen Futures Lab. I'm a consultant, advisor, and also create a lot of content, write a weekly newsletter, release technology trends. I'm a global speaker and also host events like this on a regular basis. But now over to you, Vincent. Can you tell us a bit about yourself? And also, I'm really curious to hear an interesting fact about you.
Yes, hello. Hi, Melanie. It's great to be with you. Thank you very much for this invitation. I'm very happy to be talking to your audience and presumably some of our shared audiences. So indeed, I'm Vincent Henderson. I'm the Vice President of Strategy for Lionbridge as Global Content Business. As such, I essentially oversee the teams and the thinking and the activities that have to do with trying to figure out what are the threats, what are the opportunities for Lionbridge, how do we address them? And of course, nowadays, most of the strategic questions, especially in the content industry, have something to do with AI. And so at Lionbridge, prior to that, I was the head of product and as such built pieces of the platform, the AI platform that I'll be talking about today. And prior to that, I worked in publishing, in global publishing. That's a big part of my career. And I was always applying, in any case, AI kind of at the frontier of technology applied to content. That's really my whole thing is the frontier of technology as applied to content and language. I live in Paris. And for those of you who, and I hope there are not too many English Liverpool fans on the call, because as a Paris resident, I'm also a PSG fan and had a fantastic night last night. And commiserations for any Liverpool fans on the call.
Brilliant, amazing. If you're a Liverpool fan on the call, drop something in the comments. We would love to hear from you. Amazing, incredible. And given your career history, I think, this AI revolution that we have been experiencing, especially also on the generative AI side, must have given your career a whole boost and whole new shape. So I look forward to hearing also a bit more about that. Just a bit of housekeeping before we dive in. If you are in the audience and you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. We'll be keeping an eye on the LinkedIn comments, and there is a bit of a delay. So maybe drop in your questions as we go along. I'll keep an eye on it, and then we will make sure to hopefully cover most of them before the end of this webinar. Thank you. So that leads me to my first question. Vincent, can you walk us through some real-world examples of how AI is transforming large-scale content creation? And obviously on the translation side, but also beyond just simple translations.
Yes. So the key about the use of AI for global content is to kind of understand, on one hand, what is the opportunity provided for global content by modern AIs, and how does that change the picture compared to what was possible before? And then how do you leverage that opportunity basically by using or building platforms that allow you to scale things. So for example, one of the big, let's say, examples that we have in mind, we have a few of those, but a big one that is quite prominent for us, for instance, is the example of how to generate content, product descriptions, based on your product information management system data, and then produce this content in multiple languages. So, many companies have PIMS, product information management systems, in which they manage their product content. But it's not so much their product content so much as their product data usually, right? In a PIM, you're going to have descriptions of your products as to what is it made of, who's it for, what's the audience, whatever sizes, colors, available things, maybe a bit of a history and so on. And what you want is to, from there, to produce customer-facing content, which is destined to be published on, let's say, on your e-commerce websites or other marketing channels. And so the pipeline for going from your product data in any language and in any shape and form to a global set of content that is published is for us an extremely compelling use case for Gen AI. And one thing, I've prepared a couple of diagrams where I can take you through that a little bit, but also want to maybe start by setting the stage to for obviously I've been doing webinars like this for a while now, like for a couple of years, of course. And nowadays, I guess a lot of people, have quite, some experience with LLMs, and they use LLMs probably in their own thing and so on. But I want to explain a little bit what the challenges are for using LLMs to do content in a way that is, let's say, high quality. And so I will start. I will share a couple of, like I said, a couple of slides that I have. Which is this. So up, put this in presentation, I guess, and then share
And
this.
whilst Vincent is sharing, do let us know in the comments as well if you have already played with using AI for product descriptions, or is that something you have never kind of like heard about? Is that something, you might want to talk to Lionbridge a bit more about, understanding how they could help accelerate what you do as a business? We'd really love to hear from you, because I think, having worked in the media and entertainment space for more than a decade myself, where there's just a lot of content to localize and bring to different audiences, I think this use case is absolutely revolutionary. So
Absolutely.
let's have a look at your slides.
All right. So the idea. So like I said, first, what are the challenges with using LLMs, and what do they bring to the table compared to, let's say, legacy technology? This is a bit of a busy slide, but it's not, the point is not to go in through it in a lot of detail. But the idea here is to let's say explain and show um, to people the specific ways in which LLMs using LLMs is not a there are different ways to use LLMs, is what I'm trying to say. And I'm trying to, what I would like to highlight is the fact that if you're telling me that you're using LLMs, for me, you're not telling me anything, right? Because there are really many different ways to use LLMs. There are good ways and bad ways. There are ways that work, ways that don't work. And most importantly, there are ways that scale and ways that don't scale. And that is, for me, it's a massive focus. Lionbridge is a huge content company. We process billions and billions of words every year. And so therefore, scale is very important for us. And for us, the ability to use AI at scale is really key. So here, I like to use this slide. I've used it for a long time, but it's as you can see, it's still on GPT-4, which is today a kind of an old model. But it's I like to reuse this slide. The idea, and you'll see the content here is actually content about football and PSG in particular. So the idea behind this is, all right, I have some game commentary, and I want to translate it for other audiences. Okay, so here I have, I took it in French and translated it in English just to be able to show it to other people. So this is a couple of moments, a couple of minutes of a game commentary in French, and the idea would be to translate that into English for different audiences. If you use just machine translation to do that, what you get is a very poor translation, right? Pure machine translation, we know, is kind of fairly, it has a lot of issues. And I'm not going to get into all of the details here, but here you see the annotated kind of problems that you have, right? Here you have the actual output, and below you have the annotated problems. And as you see in MT, you have some actually wrong translations. You have some mistakes in there, which are saying the wrong thing. If, however, you use an LLM, and all you do with your LLM is to say, you're a translator, translate this into this, what you get is a result that is not significantly better from a machine translation, for example. You can see that there are still errors, there are still mistakes that are made, and so on. So just using an LLM is not the actual thing that's going to all of a sudden make content magically good. What you need to do is to use LLMs in ways, and I'm sure many of you on the call have already been exposed to good prompting and how do you do good prompting and so on. But this is just a quick refresher on that, right? So if you want a good result from your LLM, what you want to do is to, first of all, that a very important piece of it is to tell the LLM what you need. So you don't just say, please translate this. You give it some kind of persona and so on. So here, for example, you tell it you're a football fan who kind of follows French football, and you're an English football fan, and so forth. Translate this content using UK football tropes and things like that. So if you do that, you get a pretty good translation already. But if you want to go further and get a very good translation, then what you actually do is you ask the LLM not only to let's say bring to its own to activate its soccer UK soccer fan kind of persona, but you also want to get it to first think about what it's doing, and you get it to analyze the problem, figure out what it needs to do, what are the challenges with this translation, what is it about, what kind of terminology is being used, are there any expressions that are very idiosyncratic that need to be thought through, blah, blah. If you do this kind of thing, if you ask the LLM to first analyze this, and then based on its analysis to do the translation, then all of a sudden you are going to get an excellent outcome. And of course, I'm sure all of you have heard about DeepSeek R1 that came up, recently in China, made a lot of big splash, but that also includes kind of O1 and O3, in particular O3 from OpenAI and others now. This is essentially what they're doing out of the box, right? So they are trained to be doing this kind of pre-analysis before they decide what their answer is. But it's possible to do exactly the same with existing cheaper models, provided that you have the platform that gets them to engage in this way with your task and to think about it before you do it. So if you do that, if you tell your LLM to first think about the problem, analyze it, and then translate it, then you get a perfect translation. And here you can see an example for a UK translation where you give it a persona of being a UK soccer fan, a football fan, I should say. And here you can get a US translation by giving it a persona for being a US soccer fan in this case. And the analysis will differ in both of those cases, and therefore the translation will be different too. So this is a simple example of translation that is just a reminder of just the fact that using LLMs doesn't tell you much about what you need to do. You need to use them the right way. Now, the thing is, here you have this little kind of interaction, right, which say, oh, do this, analyze this, oh, but please translate that, and so on. This is not something that can scale as an interactive thing, right? You're not going to be sitting in front of your ChatGPT and giving it instructions like this for all of your millions of words, right? So what you need to do is to scale this kind of approach. And the way to scale that is precisely to find a way to have a platform that is able to automate these interactions, and that's not that's very important to add to the story, which is that the output of the LLM also has to be software parsable. Right? That means that if you're going to be automating this across millions of such interactions, you need to make sure that every time you run an interaction like this, the thing that you receive from your LLM can be parsed by your software and by your platform to be moved to the next step. That's how you get scale. The only way to get scale is by making things software readable. Okay, so let's get into a little bit of a more detailed example of what the global content problem and the scale problem is on the content. So, for example, if you take this situation. Again, I'm remaining right now. I will get into the content generation in a minute, but I just want to make this point about context, and translation is a very good way of illustrating this particular point. If you have a source word that is simply shell, and you need to translate it. How do you translate this, right? You basically can't. Whether you're a human, you're a machine, you're an MT, you're an LLM, it's not possible to translate this word, because this word can mean ammunition. It can mean an animal's kind of like a snail's thing that they have on their back. It can be a hard shell of some device. It can be all kinds of things. And so if you don't know what the context is, there's no way you know what to do with this word. So the way to do that is, of course, to look at this word in context to figure out what it means. Now, one of the reasons why in the world of translation um, uh, we have humans at the end of the process to review everything that comes out. Even when we use machine translation, you have a translation and then you have what we call the post editing. Uh, the main reason for using this kind of human at the end that reviews everything is in fact to resolve the context question, right? So when a human is looking at this file at the end of the process, it's the first time that somebody is going to be looking at that sentence or that piece of a sentence and figure out what it is in the context of the overall job, the document, and so on. And we rely a lot on that ability to kind of look at the file and figure out what it's about. We rely on a lot of common sense information in the human to kind of know who the customer is, what their brand sounds like. Maybe they have a style guide on the side that they can look up, and so on. We rely on that a lot on humans for that, and that is the big change that LLMs bring to the table, which is LLMs bring to the table the ability to consume different pieces of information in order to make a decision of this type. And so, therefore, we no longer have to rely exclusively on humans to reconcile context and kind of implicits and things like that in order to make the right decision in your content. So if you have a process and a platform that is able to automate the ability to generate context, to extract context from the bigger picture, summarize it, extract the key information from it, who the audience is, what the tone is, who the brand is, what is their brand tone, all of this kind of stuff. If you can automate that and provide this information to the LLM when you're asking the LLM to make a specific choice of translation or choice of editing, then this allows you to dispense with a lot of human effort that is historically built into the process. And this goes both for translation and for generation. It's all about the context, right? So we've been saying for a long time, context is king and all of this kind of stuff in order to generally kind of explain why humans are still needed, because this kind of resolution of contextual information has been historically a human only kind of capability. But now with LLMs, if you have a platform that is smart enough, then you can do that. And that context can itself be generated by the LLM, provided that your platform is able to make that happen, right? So you have different resolutions of your content that you can have access to. So first you take the whole job, and then you run that through an LLM with a particular set of prompts that will give you exactly the right context kind of information. Then you use that information to then process in detail your content, paragraph by paragraph, sentence by sentence, or whatever. But you will have every time the context available so that the LLM can make the right decision. And that is really the key. And the uh, the let's say thing that is also kind of interesting here is that here you're seeing a product description of a product, an online product, but there are all kinds of different types of information that are relevant to a product description, such as the brand, the product collection it's in, like the category that it belongs to, and things like that. Other products that are similar. But if you're talking about a web page or a landing page for some kind of marketing campaign, or even a web page about your products and solutions, all of this information ecosystem will be very different, right? It's not going to be the same pieces that matter. For example, if I'm in, like I was saying, if I'm in some kind of retail product, what matters is what's collection, what brand, and so on it's in. What is the tone of voice? Whereas if I'm in some technology kind of page explaining the solutions of my products and so on, what matters is not the catalog and and the age of the audience. What matters is what is this technology? How do we use the correct terminology for this terminology? What is the purpose of the content? Is it marketing? Is it, on the contrary, kind of technical reference, documentation, and so on? So you need to be able to figure out the context is not just, hey, let's take this and summarize it. The context is also knowing what is the relevant information about this content in order to be able to do a good job at processing it. So that is very critical kind of piece to understand, that if you want to scale this stuff, right, if you want to make sure that you can push millions and millions of content every day through some AI-based platform, you need to have all kinds of techniques in your platform that resolve this kind of information. Right? You need to have techniques that understand what is the relevant context for this particular piece of content. How am I going to assemble it in a way that makes sense for the next step of the process, and so on. And that is really the key. And this is why the question of connectivity is actually quite important. And I'm just mentioning it a little bit in passing here. Is here you have all kinds of different kinds of platforms that exist in the real world, right? So you have PIMS, you have e-commerce platforms, you have marketing platforms, and so on. Each of those platforms typically is structured, like has a content data model, which is optimized for the type of content that lives in it, right? If I'm in a marketing platform, my data model is all around the campaign, right? It's all about my landing page that goes with my email and that goes with my social media posts. If I'm in a PIM, all of my data model is about my product information, what is it made of, who is it for, what's the SKUs, and so on. So you have different data models in the different platforms, and we believe very strongly that this is really the key, that the key is about connecting a platform that processes content to the platforms where content lives. And this is where things really can happen and be, strongly typed, let's say, so that the whole contextual information of the LLM that you want to give to the LLM makes sense, and that you can apply a content-focused approach to your structure of processing. Um, we believe, by the way, that traditional TMSs, like the translation management systems, whose job is essentially to kind of manage localization projects and kind of files and things like that, we believe that this is going to become a very niche kind of technology, and that the future is really at direct interaction between a platform that knows how to process content and a platform that knows what it wants to do with the content, which are these different kind of platform categories, and different interactions will live between them. And that's what allows you, as I said, to kind of have a content-focused approach to the to the problem. By what do I mean by a content-focused approach? It's pretty straightforward. We've developed this what we call the REACH framework, which is how do we think about the content that flows through our platform? And our platform is, let's say, applying these, we use this framework to make decisions about our projects, our platform, how we run things, onboarding and all this kind of stuff. So the REACH framework is one that aims at making sure that we always focus on what is the ROI of the content, meaning what does this content have as value for your business? And that is a very important component to figure out how much to invest in this content. Because even using AI, you have all kinds of different models of content production. Some of them can be very expensive, some of them are very cheap, but they have different levels of value that they deliver. And so therefore, you need to understand what does this content have as value for your content. You need to know, of course, what kind of engagement you're looking for. What's the goal of this content? What action is it intended to produce in the reader? And the reader, who is it? Who is the reader? Who's the audience? How do they speak? Are they part of a community, of a particular demographic, and so on? And the last two pieces is something that we'll talk about also probably in a minute, which is control and human in the loop. Control is how do you generate data and so on for controlling and calibrating your platform. And the human in the loop is what is the role of the human in this thing? And that is a critical piece of the whole new AI puzzle, is that the place of the human in the loop is actually changing compared to where things were before. Before we had a human at the end, and now we have the human kind of that can intervene in different places in the process. So having set all of that stage, let me now show you how it is applied in a particular case, which was, I guess, the question that we had originally, right? So here we have, you can see a left to right kind of flow, and we have two essentially main let's say, offerings in our global content business. One of them we call Remix, and the other one we call Localize, actually. I should have said Localize as a feature here. And the idea is to expose them as features in content platforms, or features to content platforms, that content platforms can leverage to produce the content that they need. That's the idea of the as a feature, right? I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. So what are the interactions and the methods that can happen between those platforms that manage your content where it lives, and the platform that can process your content, which is our platform, for example. As you can guess, it's called Aurora, which is what we call our platform. So essentially, you start right from product information. So you start with product information, which is in this kind of structured but very non-narrative kind of form, and you use our Remix platform to create a generator. So we call it a generator template. It's using AI to produce content, and it's you specify obviously in that generator what content is expected as the output and what information is expected as input. So this is a thing that you create once for that particular task of reading PIM data and generating content for this particular context or customer or what have you, right? So you have all of this input data and you want to create, in this case, in the example that I'm taking, a long description, a short header copy, and a main properties list, right? So this is just for an e-commerce website kind of product description. Here, it's the configuration and the LLM prompting, which is producing this content. And as you can see, there's a lot of instructions that you go through, a lot of kind of thinking about exactly what goes in, what comes out, and so forth. How do you have different generators, different conditions for different product lines, because maybe you have a different tone in different product lines and so on. So all of these things will give rise to a different way of structuring your generators. Uh, Once you have that, of course, you still need to figure out how to review the content. So you need to have some kind of editing features where humans can go in and tweak the process if they want to, like in process, the actual content, they can review it, decide whether it's validated or not, and so on. And here you can see that we have uh, some editing interface where we have already some pre-canned typical edits that people like to do, which is kind of change the tone, change the kind of language register, make it shorter or longer, and so on. But you can also give other instructions and so forth. And very critically, you can also, and that's also something you can put in the original instructions, but even in your edit, you can tell the engine, no, I would like you to use this word or this list of words in the description because these are my SEO words or what have you. They're good for my queries. So you can go and edit this, and then at the end you will get your edited piece of content. The edited content will have been achieved in a extremely much lower effort than having to have written it from scratch, because all you have to do is to look at some already pretty good description and just tweak it with the things that you care about in there, assuming that this has not been done by the LLM. Now, the very important piece here is that also, as you tweak things, and we'll get back to this later maybe, as you tweak things, you can also decide to notice that the LLM seems to be missing stuff that you care about quite regularly. So then you can go back and tweak the generator to make sure that it gets it right next time. So you gradually reduce the amount of effort that you put in. Once you have your source content, then you translate it, okay? And to translate it, again, you've seen my example earlier about the sports commentary. Translation is, is less of a trivial task than many people think. Translation is not a technical task. Or, I should say it's not only a technical task, it's also a kind of a semantic task. So you need to be very, let's say, attentive to what your translation requirements are. And as you can see here, this here is an example of our translation job post-edit. That big window here in the middle is is our configuration window for our translation jobs. Okay, so you can see that there's a lot of settings and so on that go into that apply differently depending on customers and content and so forth. So you get an input from a machine translation, and then you want to post-edit the content, meaning you need to use LLMs to then make the translations correct. And the way you make translations correct is by applying the same method that I showed you earlier, but in a much more kind of structured way this time, which is you apply multiple steps of content review where you explain in excruciating detail to your LLM exactly what it's expected to do. Okay, so you can see here there are like 12 steps that it goes through just for a standard translation post-editing, and it's applied differently depending on the content. If the content comes from your translation memory, if it's kind of fuzzy matches, as we call them, which are similar segments that have been translated before, or whether there are brand new segments, in which case you're going to want to apply your style guide to make sure that the style guide is properly applied. So you can see these 12 steps there, which include also validation steps and the like that I'll show you in a minute. So the process itself includes setting things, going through a bunch of steps, maybe human review, and using all of the standard kind of translation stack, right, with XLIF and things like that, which I won't get into. But the idea of what these 12 steps do, and this is really for me that like is the heart of understanding what's going on in the modern AI on content world. These are all the things that need to be done on translation, whether you're using LLMs or not. These are things that need to be done. These are cognitive processes that human translators or human editors go through in order to come to a good translation. And so, for example, so of course, first you have your translation memory matching, you have some initial machine translation, as I mentioned, and then you have recover the context. So you remember I was talking about the context. So get information about where is this coming from, what's the audience, blah blah, what's the tone, and all of this kind of stuff. Put it in there. Match your glossaries. So you need to go and do some RAG to go and find what your terminology, your preferred terminology is. So TM matching I've mentioned before, and then do a terminology evaluation to figure out whether this term that is a preferred term, does it actually really apply here? Is it correctly applied? Should I change it? Should I use a different term instead? And so forth. Then I do my fuzzy evaluation, which is for similar segments that were translated before. How do I make sure that I remain consistent with that style that I already have? Then I do the actual style guide evaluation if I don't have a pre-existing translation. Style guides are very complex things. They contain tons of instructions and things and so forth. So you need to resolve what is the right instruction, how do I apply it here, and so forth. All of these things need to be done. And then you do the edit of your sentence or paragraph or whatever of your content. And this is a critical part, you then do a validation of it. And here, what we've decided to do is to do a double validation, a double parallel validation. We basically validate it twice using the LLM. And we use slightly differently tweaked things in order to make sure that we can then decide. We look at the answer of both validations, and we can make different decisions on whether they're the same and whether they're different. Okay, and then based on that decision, we either send stuff to a human for a final post edit because the validation said, I think there's a problem with this and I'm not sure how to fix it, or the validation said, yep, all good, this is great content, you can publish it, and in which case we say we lock it, meaning we lock it in, right? We cache it in, if you like, and then we publish it. And that's one big way in which you can make savings using AI, is by having a reliable workflow by which you identify the content that you don't need to send to human review. And that is really the key differentiator. And of course, we also have then our automated LQA at the end. Once the post edit has been done, there is a later step, which is a pure linguistic QA that can happen at the full deliverable level, which we can get into later. But I don't want to get into it right now. So I want to give you an example of what this accomplishes, because it's really important. It's a picture and so on. Let me show you the kinds of edits that you get with this kind of approach that up until recently you were only able to get with a human. So if you look at this, you have, this is your English source, okay? So assume it's already been edited and it's great and so forth. And you can see here, I've highlighted a couple of expressions which are fairly idiosyncratic. So here you have, for example, whether you're driving to the basket or defending your turf. So this is obviously a basketball term, and everybody here understands what that means, right? You're driving to the basket or you're defending your turf. The thing is, if you look at the definition of the verb to drive in English, it includes a meaning that means to press forward, to move forward aggressively, and so on, right? So driving to the basket is a good metaphorical use of the word to drive, which is not about driving a car. However, if you look at the definition of to drive, to conducir in Spanish, there is no definition of conducir in Spanish that means to press forward aggressively. That is not a metaphorical use of the verb to drive in Spanish. That's just the way it is. It's sometimes hard to realize that we take for granted a lot of metaphorical stuff that does not exist in other languages. They have other metaphors for similar things or for different things. So here, the MT, the machine translator, or direct machine translation, is not able to make these kinds of distinctions. It doesn't understand metaphor because it doesn't understand context. And so therefore, the machine translation has translated to drive as conducir, which means literally to drive a car. So for a Spanish person reading that, that evokes in their head a sense of somebody actually driving a vehicle on the basketball court. the translation should use a different verb. In this case, for instance, penetrar. Penetrar actually means to enter in a zone and things like that, right? So you can replace this verb by this other verb. The same goes, for example, for turf. Turf is literally means in English actual grass, right? But it's used metaphorically for your pitch, right? However, the same in Spanish, that's not the case. Césped means grass, and we're talking about basketball. There's no grass in basketball. So therefore, the translation has updated it to posición, which means your home ground, and so on. So I just wanted to highlight that because this really brings to bear the understanding of what LLMs bring to the table in terms of language quality that it's able to derive. And so another example is, for instance, something like this. You have a lot of out of context words that may exist in like this. In this case, it's a PowerPoint training video thing for some car manufacturer. And you can see, without getting into details, all the red underlines are wrong out of context translations, and in some cases, very wrong. If you use this kind of context resolution technique by taking the whole PowerPoint and kind of feeding the context and the details to the LLM, then you get actual correct translations, because each time the LLM is fixing a translation, it knows what the context is and so on, and it will not make these kinds of mistakes. So basically, if you do all that, you have this whole pipeline of content that can be 100% automated, but where you can decide to have some humans come in and review stuff or see what's up throughout places in the process. And the idea here is that this kind of platform gives you, with interactions with the content platforms, gives the users the ability to kind of focus on what matters to your business. So you focus on your product data and your content itself that you publish. And you don't have to worry, by having this as a feature kind of construct where you can just call a platform from your content platform to perform all of this complex stuff for you. Then you don't have to worry about kind of how am I going to use LLMs to do my content? We have a platform that takes care of all of this stuff and delivers the kinds of results that I just showed you. So it's a very long answer and it was slide supported. So therefore, kind of I got into my usual kind of spiel there. I hope this was not too, kind of monotone. But that is a very strong real life example of using LLMs throughout the whole content lifecycle, using a platform that is designed to do that.
Brilliant. Wow, that was so much
Yeah.
information and yeah, super insightful. I mean, I actually learned a lot myself. I hope the audience as well. So just to follow up on that, and I also really enjoyed how you went into the depths of linguistics, because sometimes there's a myth of, oh, I just put something into an LLM using whatever ChatGPT and it will translate things for me perfectly. No, it doesn't really, because you still
Exactly.
need a human in the loop. It needs to understand context and so on. So that was just super helpful. I guess I have a question around, and that hopefully touches on a question we got through from Conrad. Thinking about personalization or hyper personalization using your technology and platform,
Mm-hmm.
obviously you demoed the translations. Could that then also adapt the product descriptions and copy for different target audiences, and to sort of add what the question Conrad posted? He was asking, if a website could read cookies, can content be tailored? And I don't know exactly whether that means, going off to a website and scraping the content, or is it actually the Netflix model that everyone's view of Netflix looks different based on, people's preferences? But maybe we could focus on the hyper personalization aspect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the hyper personalization, as far as I understand, the term hyper in hyper personalization means really personalized to that specific user in that specific moment, right? That's what I think hyper personalization
Yeah, exactly.
means. It goes far beyond kind of doing a different version for a different audience, right? This is just personalization. Hyper personalization means right now, indeed, I'm reading your cookies and I know where you've just been and things like that. And I'm going to write content that is exactly tailored for that. So yes, of course, that is possible. However, uh, the let's say the costs of that particular approach are much are much bigger, in the sense that for two reasons. Um, Actually, yeah, for two reasons. One of which I'm going to put a little new screen on the thing on the screen. I just want to show you this. Right, this is just a minute number of the actual LLMs that exist in the world today, right? There are many more than that. Each brand has dozens of versions. There are dozens of brands of LLMs and so forth, including Grok, DeepSeek, and different versions. Blah, blah. So, okay, so there are a ton of LLMs out there. So which LLM you use actually matters, right? Not every LLM is created equal. They have different capabilities, different kind of costs and things like that. So tuning the right cost to the right usage or use case, I should say, is actually quite important. The reason I'm pointing this out in answering to this question is that, for instance, if you're going to be doing hyper personalization, you need a very capable model, right? You need if you're going to be writing custom content for that user, you need a very capable model, because your goal is to make that particular user very happy, right? So you can't afford poor content, things that look really bad when you're doing hyper personalization, because it defeats the purpose. You might as well have good content that fits everybody rather than bad content just for this person, right? So you need to use an advanced model. If you're going to be doing this kind of on the spot personalization, you need a very low latency instance of your model, right? You cannot wait like 10 seconds until your content's been generated before you show it to the user. So you need extremely low latency, kind of real time deployments of these models, and they exist. But a real time deployment is, can be 10 times more expensive than a deployment that is not kind of optimized for real time. So all of these things have to be taken into account, right? You have to figure out the economics of your hyper personalization thing, meaning if you're going to be doing this hyper personalization, how many how much uplift in your click-through rate do you expect, basically, right? At the end of the day, that's what you're going to have to figure out. If you expect to multiply by 5 or by 10 your click-through rates by doing hyper-personalized content, well then, and your click-through rate is relatively low in terms of cost, and it brings you a lot of business, and you've got good margin on your click-through rates, whatever, then it's worth doing maybe with an expensive model to do that. But if you're only going to get like a 5% bump or 10% uplift in your, in your action, in your click-through rate, for example, if you do hyper personalization, then maybe it's not really worth the expense. Because beyond the actual cost of the model, the thing is, you're going to have to figure out also what is the context, basically, of the interaction, right? I spent a lot of time talking about the context earlier. And so you need to make sure that the relevant contextual information for this hyper personalization, like as I said, from cookies, from where this person has been, and so on, to be extremely hyper specific to what they want. You're going to need to craft your prompts and so forth in a way that it doesn't get tripped if all of a sudden some user shows up with a context that you have not anticipated, for example, right? So things like this, it's not a trivial, simple thing to think through, but it's definitely doable. But it has to be worth it economically.
Thanks for also giving us I loved how you said economics of hyper personalization,
Right.
because sometimes, within the industry, when you work with content, when you provide digital consumer products, there's so many buzzwords going around. And, clients I have, for example, worked with in the past, they were often very quick to just say, yeah, I want to do this thing, but actually, what is the ROI here and how do we make informed decisions? So
Yeah.
really helpful. I guess my next question, but before I ask you my next question, just a quick heads up to the audience. We will have some time at the end for questions. So please start dropping your questions into the comments now, as I'm just, wrapping up with my questions that I'm going to ask Vincent. So thinking about Vincent's thinking about global brands and their specific messaging and brand voice. So you already talked about, when you took us really helpfully through your workflow, you already talked about style guides. And I guess, they can then be adapted for different languages, because some languages, have a different focus. They're more emotional. I grew up in Germany. Our language tends to be very wordy. Um, so how can, with your solution, and especially when we think about quality control at scale, how can brands ensure that they maintain their brand voice?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That's a very critical piece of the puzzle, of course. Um, so the question of quality is, of course, and I use the word quality here, even though I just want to make, I use quality in the sense of compliance with what you expect and that you know is required, let's say, for your content. Um, and so this question is one that um, is central. So as you mentioned, style guides are critical. Um, if you recall from what I was talking about earlier about the question of context and assembling the right amount of information for the LLM to make the right decision and so on, um, because we no longer, or at least our goal is to get to a point where we're no longer 100% dependent on a human being making the final call at the end for every single word that comes out of your thing. We want to automate some of that, at least, or at least the majority of it. Because of that, we cannot rely on this kind of the common sense of that person to be applied at the end, right? So it's one thing if you see, I'm sure many of you are familiar with style guides the way they exist today in the real world. They can be very loose and they can leave a lot to be to the interpretation of the editor or something like that, right? They say, oh, we kind of like this, and then the editor is going to figure it out. If you're going to be using automation and you want to automate very, extensively, you have to put in a bit more effort to clarify your instructions, to make your instructions less dependent on some fuzzy common sense that somebody's going to eventually someone will figure it out, right? Because a lot of style information is written like that. I've noticed anyway, and that is something that if you want to automate, you need to clarify what you expect, because what we don't want, right? And that is something that happens, right? But that is really, I think, a bad practice. And in fact, it's almost toxic, I would say, in the kind of relationship, service relationship, is where the requirements are unclear. The expectation is automation for low costs. And then at the end, once it's delivered, it's like, oh, but it's not like this, and it's not like this, and it doesn't do this, and I prefer it this way, and so on. But this is not something that has been previously kind of clarified. So the iterative nature of these kinds of new interactions is really critical for the service interaction in particular to be understood. So, for example, what we now, let's say, try to enforce on every new customer, new onboarding, at least of the platform for an existing customer or not, is precisely a cycle of iterations where, okay, we will customize the generators or the prompts and not the prompts, but the configs for you. We'll make sure the right context is there. We'll use the glossary properly, style guide, blah, blah. We do all of this and we generate some content for you and we iterate on that content with you, right? We generate our first version, we give it to you, you review it, and you say, well, I don't like this, or I forgot to add this in the style guide, or I have here's additional terms to add to my glossary. So you figure out what you need to do, new instructions in the configuration itself, in the LLM interaction, in order to improve the output. So you do iterations on that, and then at some point, you get to a point where you know what you're getting, right? Where you know, all right, the LLM gets it right, or not the LLM, but again, the configuration, the whole process gets it right in the end, whatever, 80% of the time. And it's actually quite good at identifying the 20% of stuff that is not very good, that needs to be reviewed by a human. And voila. And therefore, we agree on that. And we agree that this is what we're doing. And that is what gives you the benefit of cost reductions and maintaining good quality. So I really insist on this kind of iterative thing because it's very important. Using LLM-based technology is the same basically as doing coding, but with language, right? LLM prompts are code, but with language. And therefore, you need to apply similar kind of processes. And iterative development is something which has been in place for a long time in the development world, where you start by doing something, it does pretty much what you want, but not exactly, and then you improve it and all this kind of stuff, right? So same thing here. And in order to do that, you need to be able to manage data, right? And so let me show you on the screen. I'm going to reshare this to give you a sense of the kind of data that we. Let me find the window. There it
That's
is
a lot of
that I'm talking
data.
about.
That's great.
Yeah, exactly. So these are things that we. This is either data that we know just for the benefit of people on this call, but we also track this data with every one of our customers in all the different content types and so on, so that we can we know what these things are. So as you can see, without getting into, I just want to do a time check here. Yeah, I don't want to get into too much detail into that, but basically the idea is you see here the different steps. Remember I showed you the 12 steps with the validations and things like that. So these are the actual steps from there that actually output a new translation at some point that then gets validated or whatever. And as you can see, each step gets the translations closer to a good translation, to the final state. And in the final state, this is what we have. So it varies by content type, by customer, and so on, by the type of customization you're doing, but it's representative of what typically what we get. What we get is that we get 75% of correct identification by the config of the fact that the content is good, right? So that means that we can rely on this evaluation. We get a minor, what we call locking error, which means it's been identified as good by the config, but when a human reviews it, it goes, could have been better, right? That's the kind of what a minor error mean. And a major locking error is, well, I didn't really use the right term here, or some more serious problem that occurs in 0.4% of the case. So this is like in one particular case. What's really important to realize is that this kind of minor locking error around 4.5% and major locking error at about 5%, what you need to compare it to is the error rates that humans make. Because there is no such thing as perfection, right? There is only as good as we can make it. And humans historically have been considered to be, well, the best way we can make it is by asking a human to kind of finalize the translation. When you look at the data, the same data for translations that have been done by human beings, the error rate is pretty much identical, right? So what we get here in terms of our ability to identify that a segment or that a sentence or a paragraph or a description or whatever is good is with the same accuracy as when a human does it. And that's what matters, right? There is no 100% quality. That doesn't exist mostly because most people don't even really know what they mean by quality. So I just want to be clear about that. So by using data like that, by tracking where it is on the evaluation of how good it is and so on an ongoing basis, that gives us the ability to generate data that will tell us where the human needs to intervene. So on one hand, the AI itself leaves open what we call open segments. It means that the AI says this should be reviewed by a human. So that's something, that happens. The humans will go and review it if that's the service level that we've agreed on. Um, and that's one thing. But separately from that, we do evaluations on an ongoing basis, on a sampling basis of everything that is there, so that we can get this data and we know how good our LLM decisions are. But most importantly, I was talking about the iterative thing. This is also where you identify certain types of errors or mistakes or problems or whatever that tend to occur. When the LLM tends to get something wrong, you kind of figure out what's the context? Why is it getting this wrong here? Is there some kind of regularity to this error that it makes? And then if you see that, then you can go back to your AI and fix it and say, okay, well, in that case, introduce a new element of context, maybe with a special instruction, things like that. And in the end, the goal is to gradually, reduce the amount of stuff that has to be reviewed by humans.
I love that because, especially thinking about trust, this just really showcases that with your solutions, brands can move away from a black box model. They
Exactly.
actually can understand, okay, how reliable is my LLM and how reliable are the decisions it's making. So I think there's huge value in that. Thank you. This leads us
Yeah.
on to our last question, which is actually one of my favorite. Those who know me know that I'm really into futurology, and that's not just getting out my crystal ball, but that is actually in a structured way tracking signals and trends to then making informed decisions about the future. And therefore, obviously, I'm super excited to be on this webinar with Vincent, who is an expert in this space. So, Vincent, looking ahead, how do you see AI evolving in the content production space? What are sort of like the key trends that you have been observing? And if you were to predict the future and what it's going to look like for brands, let's say in 3, 5, or 10 years' time, what would that look like?
Yeah, I think so. First of all, I want to say that one of the things that I often say is that we can't predict the future, right? I think it's very important in life to be aware that we cannot predict it. However, what we can do is anticipate, try to figure out where we want it to go, where we think it can go, and then try and make that happen. I think that's as far as we can go. But anyway, having said that, though, I think that what we're seeing is the rise of AIs that are what is often called agentic AI, that can make that it can increasingly make decisions and orchestrate multiple AI interventions. So agentic AI is very much rising at the moment as a concept, and it's very exciting and it's very fun. We've been testing it and we're using it, and so on. But what I think is really key is that you're going to have this kind of autonomy of AIs that go further and further in their ability to review things. Now, even with the data that I had on the screen earlier, we say some of the stuff should be reviewed by a human. That's because we've made the conscious decision to stop after a certain number of iterations. But we could continue to kind of burn tokens and get to a point where everything is 100%. The thing is, there are the diminishing returns, and therefore, the more tokens you burn, the more expensive it is, and then that means that there's less and less value that you get out of applying it. However, token costs are going to go down. There's no question about that. The ability for AIs to be able to using cheaper and cheaper tokens, meaning going through more and more iteration cycles, the ability for the AI to finalize stuff will be better and better. So that is, let's say, for text in particular, that is very likely the case. However, the people who will benefit from that are the people who are able to be very clear about what they expect, right? So that you can actually build your expectation in the AI. Because the AI left to its own devices will do stuff 80% of the time it's going to be what you want, and 20% of the time it's going to suck as far as you're concerned. So the question is, if you're able to constrain that and make sure that the AI knows what you expect in excruciating detail, as I like to say, I think that's a big part of being successful with AI. As far as let's say more kind of technological kind of things that come up in the 2, 3 to 5 years, I think that video is going to be the big surprise. I like to say that video type multimedia content, video content lags textual content by a couple of years in terms of what it can do, what the AIs can do, in terms of the versatility of AI usage. So, for example, right now you can, which you couldn't do a year ago, you can create short videos of a few seconds where you have object persistence in them, for example, right? And that is really a huge thing, right? Because if you don't have your objects persisting from frame to frame, then you can't really do a video that does anything useful. So now it's a few seconds. A few months from now, it's going to be maybe a few minutes, and maybe 3 years from now, it's going to be maybe a few hours. We don't, that's really hard to predict, but that's the direction in which it's going. And so I think that this is going to be like the next big time saver and kind of and so on that will be coming up. The key question with video, though, I think, and in image content in general, is the ability to follow instructions in a lot of detail. Seems to me, as far as I can tell, also a kind of limitation of those things. It's very hard to get exactly what you want as you describe it in those things. It's going to give you more or less what you want. It's typically going to apply often a style and so on, which is a very let's say a very not very personal style. It's going to be very rote and typical kind of styles. So I think that that's where a lot of the change is going to happen in the next 2, 3, 5 years. It's going to be mostly for this kind of video editing in the world of content I'm talking, because for text, I'm pretty sure that it's more in horizon now of like 6 months to a year where we'll be able to have like 95% of everything that will be properly provided you make the effort of clarifying what you need, that will be finalizable by the AI. And I think by that time, once we have even cheaper tokens and higher, or I should say lower latency in terms of real time stuff, then the question that Conrad was asking earlier is going to, that's also going to change the economics, right? Token price changes the economics of your use case. If you want to do hyper personalization, it's much more accessible to do with a token at whatever a 1,000th of a cent than if it's a 100th of a cent, right? So these are the kinds of things that are going to change. Uh, Video control and reduction in token cost. I would say these are the two trends that matter.
Amazing. And I absolutely agree. I already run my own agentic AI virtual workforce, and I love using tools like OpenAI's Sora for video generation or even editing with its new storyboarding feature. So I
Right.
think there's a lot of innovation happening, and cost is the other thing, that will really drive that with the costs now coming down. I totally agree. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I feel like I could talk to you for another
Yeah,
hour at
I did
least.
talk for a long time. I'm sorry.
Oh, well, we could host another event maybe in France next time and bring some wine in. So here we go.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Vincent. Thanks to everyone for joining. Thank you for your questions. Next week I'll be with Dominic Schreier, who will be talking about fan engagement and the economics of sport and how that's changing the game. So make sure to tune in again. Again, thank you, Vincent, and I hope everyone have a great rest of the day.
Thank you very much, Melanie. It was very it was a lot of fun to be talking to you. Talk to you soon.
Amazing. My pleasure. Thank you.
Everybody.
Bye.